Wonderful morning at this point, and that we are here at the end of November talking a little bit about AutoCAD, hopefully teaching you something about the next stages in our course here. Today we'll be using the AutoCAD Web App. We're going to be using the Lab Under the Stairs, obviously, for your assignment, and we're going to be talking specifically about perspective. Now, we've introduced this concept last week when we were talking in class, and talking about the idea that perspective is different than an isometric oblique drawing, and definitely different than orthographic. They are all different ways of representing something in 3 dimensions, but they all do it in a very different way. Now, this one's a bit of a weird one because usually the home of perspective is in art. Not necessarily in engineering, not necessarily in robotics, but it is something that you should probably understand simply for the fact that it matters a lot for presenting imagery to, let's say, a customer in an engineering sense. Because obviously perspective is the way our eyes see the world, whereas an isometric or an oblique drawing is the way that the object is in proper measurements. We don't see the world that way. An object further out on the horizon, out in the distance, seems or appears much smaller to us than one that is up close. I think the concept we used last week was talking about goaltenders and cutting down the angle. The idea that the goalie being very close to you appears very large, and further away from you appears very small. Now, that has a definite application in soccer or in hockey, but in terms of drawing, it actually matters as well, because a long object that is closer to the horizon is going to look smaller in its kind of further away aspect than it is in the near aspect. We're going to simulate that, we're going to draw that, and we're going to use the Tetris brick as the idea for this. Now, we use the Tetris brick because it's relatively easy to draw. It's relatively easy to understand. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to actually be doing one piece of the assignment. This is the isometric, oblique, 1-point and 2-point perspective, and you need to pick 2 of these to draw. If you pick an O or an I, which are relatively easy shapes to do, I do ask that you take one of the more complex shapes just to show me that you know what you're doing. Today I think we're going to do an L block of some sort, might be a J block, we'll see. Depends which orientation we start with here. And we're actually going to be putting those together. I'm going to hop over the AutoCAD Web App here, and I'm just going to hop back to my default folder and start a new drawing. Let's see if this works here. We're going to call this Tetris. Totally spelled piece wrong. It's clearly too early in the morning for this sort of thing, and that's okay. Let's start this thing in metric, and we get our nice little layout here, so we can do some stuff. Now, I'm going to start in the model view. I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to do what we usually do, but this time I really only need one layer. I really only need the drawing layer. I don't need to get too fancy with this today, because again, we're just illustrating how this looks as much as anything. So let's hop back to our views and let's start drawing. Now, the first thing we need to do when we're talking about perspective, and what I'm going to actually do is I'm actually going to start by drawing this L piece we're going to do in oblique and isometric, and then we're going to turn it to 1- and 2-point perspective in that order, actually. So let's just zoom in and let's grab this. Oh, I appear to have some loading issues this morning. Let's see if we can reload this and make this work. File cannot be opened. Okay, cool. Something's gone on with my file location. Let's see what we can reload and do. We'll go from here. Test folder, did not save. I'm just going to pop up a previous drawing right now, just because I have access to these. We'll see what we can do to go from here. We have initials in isometric and orthographic. I'm just going to hop back to my model view. There we go. We'll zoom ourselves around and let's actually play with this in some blank model space. Okay, same thing. I'm going to go to layers. I have a drawing layer that's in blue. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it perspective. It'll just be the layer that we can go ahead and play with right now. And what that's going to do is let us actually start drawing this thing. Okay, so we're doing an L piece. I'm going to drop to my perspective layer, and we're going to take the line tool, and I'm just simply going to draw a line 2 units across. I'm going to zoom in on that. Okay, and I'm going to draw this guy. Let's do it from this side. Let's go 3 units up, 1 unit across, 2 units down, 1 unit across, and 1 unit down. Now, that's just very simply jumping on with the idea that these are all the Tetris bricks occur within a 4x4 space, obviously the eye being the only one that really uses all of that, but still proves our point. Now, if we're going to draw this object in oblique, we're very simply going to set our polar snaps down here to 45s. We're going to draw our line out, and we're simply going to draw the top on this. And part of the reason why I'm drawing this right now in oblique first is so that we can illustrate the differences between these, because that's really what we're looking for here. And obviously I missed my button click there. That's okay. Go ahead and finish that line proper using our snaps. We're going to finish that object. Okay, so that looks vaguely like a Tetris brick. Kind of works with what we needed to do. And then in isometric, it's going to look very similar. We're just going to follow it over and do the exact same thing we did. Verticals don't change. Our Y direction remains unchanged. But this is going to allow us to do isometric view for, I'm going to go 2 units this way, by 1, by 1, by 2. And we're going to finish off this drawing. And there we go. Okay, so now we've got an oblique, now we've got an isometric view. We can kind of see how those bricks work. And we can see that the back part of the brick, if I were to actually throw a dimension on this, the back part of the brick here, measurement-wise, is exactly 1, whereas that same piece, somewhere else in the drawing, is also 1. And this actually occurs throughout this drawing. It doesn't really matter where I go on this. All of my dimensions, providing I snap properly here, there we go, all of my dimensions are going to go exactly where I want them to be. Okay, this is actually structurally accurate to how big these are supposed to be. Now let's draw them in perspective. Now the first thing we need in perspective is we need what's called a vanishing point. This is the point on the horizon where the thing looks like it's going to be vanishing to. Now the way we determine a vanishing point, usually, is based on where we are standing in relation to the object. And depending on where you put your vanishing point in this one, it's going to make the object look different. If an object is close to the vanishing point, it's actually going to look a little bit more, I guess a little closer to you, a little higher up on the horizon. Whereas if the vanishing point is high, it's going to look low. We're going to illustrate this actually. I'm going to put a vanishing point. I'm just going to slap a line up here and use this, the end of this line is my vanishing point. And I'm just going to draw a couple of cubes in perspective just so we can actually start to do this. I'm going to start with 1 point perspective, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make a very simple cube, 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. Nothing fancy there. And in 1 point perspective, we're going to draw in the Z-axis direction, so into the page. This is very simply going to create a drawing like so. And you'll notice that my polar snaps are still on. I can leave them on. I don't have to turn them off, but they might be annoying to some people because sometimes they get you, sometimes they get in the way when you're doing things. So if you want to turn those off, just click polar down here, and life is good. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to simply draw another line here, and we draw it up from the nearest corner to me. And I'm going to make this one actually accurate at 1 unit across. And then I'm going to realize I turned my polar snaps off. I'm going to turn my 90 polar snaps back on because I kind of need them. And let's see what we can do. This line obviously doesn't have them applied, so let's find the end of the line. There we go. Oh, here we go. I turned them to 90, but I didn't turn polar snaps back on. That's unfortunate. Let's go across here. Let's go down here. Let's actually finish this thing. I'm going to use a trim command to finish it. Trim command works out really well to just cut off the outside. Now, what you see is that this cube is in perspective, okay? I can clearly see that. I can clearly see that when I annotate the back of the cube, knowing that the front of the cube is exactly 1 unit, here we go, okay? I can see that the back of the cube is actually smaller than the front of the cube. It's actually gotten smaller in perspective, and that kind of makes sense. That does exactly what we're supposed to do. Now, the closer this cube gets to the vanishing point here, let's just illustrate this. I'm going to copy and paste. I'm just going to draw the exact same cube, but I'm going to draw it a heck of a lot. Actually, I'm going to draw it a little bit off to the right of the vanishing point, and I'm going to draw another one that's actually very, very close to the vanishing point, and we'll illustrate the differences between them. This is nice because I can actually put a lot of lines on these all at once. I'm going to draw this back to the vanishing point here and here. Okay, I'm going to draw this guy back to the vanishing point here. I'm just going to jump straight over to this other cube and show you the difference in how these become related to that vanishing point. So let's do this line, and again, I'm just going to line it up here, press the number 1, and that's going to draw me a line exactly 1 unit away from where I want it to. Zoom in here, make the snap, and trim away the excess. Now, you remember what I said a moment ago? We were talking about what the vanishing point, or why the vanishing point matters. And it kind of, where it sits in relation to the thing you're drawing determines how it looks. And I hope we illustrated that here. So, these three cubes all use the exact same vanishing point. They are all in the exact same boat as far as how they, what they've referenced. But as you can see, this one on the bottom here, being further below the vanishing point, we tend to look at this as if we are a little more on top of it. Whereas these ones, we look more like we're on the side of them. Obviously, this cube here, actually, we can kind of see the top of this cube here. We can see more of the top of this cube because it's sitting in a bit of a different orientation to the vanishing point versus this one here. Now, where your vanishing point is in relation to your Tetris brick for this assignment doesn't bother me at all. You can put them wherever you like, really honestly. But I just hope that you do have a vanishing point. So what we're going to do, we are going to create, I'm going to create a new horizon line. I'm just going to jump over here, and I'm going to actually put it just to the right of this one. And also how wide your horizon line is going to determine how your objects look. Again, this is more of an art than a science in many senses in terms of perspective. When we're drawing in AutoCAD, there are obviously some programs that can do this automatically once we get to 3D, but we're not quite there yet. So let's draw this Tetris brick, and I'm going to start by doing a couple things. I want to make an assumption with this Tetris brick that while it is going to be an L-shaped block right here, it's going to be 3 units tall, 2 units wide. I'm also going to draw it 1 unit deep. Okay, and again, I say units. It doesn't really matter what our units are. Now let's start with 1-point perspective. 1-point perspective is a lot like oblique in the sense that its front face of this object is going to be exactly the same size and exactly in the right proportions that it normally would be. We literally draw the front exactly as if we were looking at this object front on. And from there, we only need to draw our perspective in one direction. We actually only need to go from here to the vanishing point. Okay, and I'm going to jump there and there. Okay, and now this is going to allow us to actually draw the top of this object. We actually have a few other tools that we can do. We can actually draw the front edge here as well. And I'm just going to pick the nearest edge to me. In that case, that's this one. And I'm just going to draw it accurately at 1 unit. Okay. From there, I am going to simply follow that 1 unit along. And it's going to allow me, by simply keeping my horizontal and vertical, so my sideways and my up and down lines consistent, it's going to allow me to actually finish off the rest of this drawing. Now that looks more or less like a Tetris brick. Okay, I can turn around and trim this off. Actually cut the pieces out that I don't need, and there we go. We have now a Tetris brick in 1-point perspective, and that's going to give us something to work with from here. 1-point perspective, and I'm going to make the size on this, I suspect, 0.75, and we have a label, such as life. This is going to actually allow us to draw something that is a little bit more accurate than it might be in oblique if we were showing it, let's say, to a customer. And just for reference, I'm going to go over and grab those Lego bricks and grab the oblique ones so that you can compare the difference between the oblique and 1-point perspective. And you can obviously see the top and side are represented very differently in the oblique versus the 1-point perspective. We can kind of see that this is how our eyes might see this object. Now let's hop over to 2-point perspective. 2-point perspective isn't actually all that complicated. Just going to move this out of the way so that I don't, so we can put it over there. And let's do the same thing in 2-point perspective. Now, just like we were to be talking about with an isometric drawing, we are going to start in the vertical here. And we're going to start with a vertical line. And unlike the 1-point perspective, though, I do something a little bit different here. All 2-point perspective is relatively easy to get started. You just run both sides off into the vanishing point. That's our X and our Y direction. Our X and our Z direction. And one of the things I'm going to do this time, just to make this a little bit easier, is I'm actually going to draw the whole Tetris brick right now. I'm actually going to follow this along. Use my snap point here. Okay, I'm going to actually go 1 unit in this direction. Yeah, we'll go that way. And then I'm going to run back across here. And in this direction, I'm going to go 2 units because I know that this is part of a 2x3 part. It's 2 units wide. If we're actually following along, 2 units wide along the bottom, and 3 units tall. So we've kind of drawn that. And that is going to give us something to play with, where we can jump across here. Now, obviously this top aspect of this brick now is actually accurate. It's actually what we need. And all right, now we have an object that is 1 by 2 by 3, and we can actually start drawing the thing. So I'm going to trim away the lines I don't need, just cut them away, because that's going to give me something to start with. And it is going to then, I'm going to bisect this down into its pieces here, just by using the centers of the lines. Okay, snap, 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 and this is going to allow us to actually do the cutting on this one. I know that I've got a 3 unit line here, so I'm going to go 1, I'm going to go 1, and that's actually going to allow me to run a couple lines if I want to back to the vanishing point. And all I'm doing right now is I'm just cutting up this brick, and I probably don't need to do it on this side because this side is likely going to show up. Actually, no. Let's illustrate this and let's make this L this direction. Okay. So in this case, I am going to actually cut it up into all of its pieces, all 6. There we go. And that doesn't look bad. It looks like a really big O brick. There's nothing wrong with that in Tetris. And from here, this is going to allow us to now actually finish this drawing. We're missing one line, I realize, now that I'm staring at it. And that's going to be the top piece here. And from here, this is going to now allow us to actually finish this drawing by cutting away the pieces that we don't really need. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and trim. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim away the entire top portion of this here. Okay, I'm going to make those go away. And I am going to delete these guys. Okay, this is going to give me most of my Tetris brick that I need already. I'm just going to fill in the lines that are now missing. Okay, obviously this line would still be there. Life is good. And we know that as we do this, we would still have a line running back to the vanishing point through here. Okay, I may have deleted that in error. That's okay. We just redraw it. Okay, from here I'm going to draw my last line over here back to a vanishing point. Okay, now from here this is easy because now I can turn around and trim away the parts I don't need from both of those lines. Take this line, delete it, and now I can actually take and delete the lines I probably didn't need in the first place from this one. Okay, and that is going to allow me to finish off here and here, here and here, and there's our Lego brick in 2-point perspective. Now, this looks, again, a lot like the isometric, but let me show you where they do start to diverge. We're going to redraw this one more time because why not? Let's grab this guy, which is an isometric, and let's compare it to our 2-point perspective brick. Okay, they look very similar. They are kind of similar, but there is a point where the similarities do end. I'm going to cancel my commands here, grab my perspective marker, drop this on here, and rename it 2-point perspective. Here we go. That's the number 2. Press OK. Here we go. Now, where does this perspective piece lead, though? Because, I mean, this and this functionally, I mean, they're the same thing. We can go in and we can test that, yes, this line is 1, and yes, the equivalent line behind it here is not quite 1. We can show that it's perspective, but where it really starts to matter is when objects are represented on a plane that is not kind of 3/4 view down. It's not looking at it from above. Because the 2-point perspective, or sorry, the isometric drawing up here looks just like this. But if I make the same drawing, I'm just going to move it out of the way here so it's in a different place. If that same drawing happens with this object above the horizon like so, we're going to turn around and have a very different effect. So let's do that. 3. Okay, now we're just simply going to do the exact same thing we did before. We're going to draw our brick here to here, here to here. I'm going to draw the bottom of it 2 units that way. And again, I'm going to go straight up. Draw another line. Oh, sorry. I'm going to draw a line up 1, another line up 1. And I really only need the first one of these. I don't need the second. But I'm going to draw it across here. And again, we're going to draw this back here, 1 unit, straight up. And then we're going to finish off the bottom of our perspective. There, and there. And then we are going to make a line that is going to go 1 unit this way. No, I can go halfway. Such is life. Okay. And then we're going to trim away all the lines we don't need. There. Also going to trim away those ones. And now you see that we actually have a Tetris brick that's in a very different place than the isometric, right? This is how something would appear if it was above you. It was floating up above the horizon. And here we have our isometric. It's pretty much unchanged. Okay? And this is how we're going to represent things in kind of in different ways. Now, what I'm asking of you is to take two different Tetris bricks, use this tutorial, use it as a guide for what you're doing, and basically draw them in the four different methods: isometric, oblique, 1-point, 2-point perspective. Please label all four, and you have to do two different Tetris bricks. I don't care which ones, but if you do pick the O or the I as one of them, you do have to do one of the more complex ones. I do recommend you start with an O and an I. This is a really good way to get your feel for perspective and how we actually put these things together. Again, assume they are all 1 unit deep, and when you're all said and done, you can actually finish this up, and I'll open up a Dropbox where we can drop these things in and actually finish up the project. If you have any questions, I believe there's going to be class today, and we can go from there. Cheers.